start, right? How
Yes.
was that lecture? No.
It was actually on Martian exploration, so it's a nice connection to what I'm gonna.
Yeah, I was
back.
thinking about going there, but the space industry one was here. It was
Alright.
really, really nice.
Yes.
Very good one. Yeah.
Okay.
Hey.
You came anyway. Are there more people on the way, or? You're the last one in here?
I don't know.
Yeah. So at least, well, thank you for coming anyway. What I want to talk to you about today is motivation for manned spaceflight. We're, the three of us at least, we're space engineering students ourselves, and we sometimes get asked the question, why should we put billions or millions of euros in the manned space program if we can spend the same one? Welcome. So let me start over then, just started. So as a future space engineer, we get asked the question quite a lot about why should we spend millions or billions of dollars in a manned space program, or actually in manned space exploration, if we can spend the same money in fixing our problems here on Earth. And looking into the literature and in history, I haven't really found a conclusive reason why we should do this. At least, you find a lot of reasons why you should do it, but also a lot of opponents. And for example, what you read a lot is people claim space is just an expensive hobby. So I went back into history and the reasons why we actually started the manned program. And the main drivers were mainly political and geopolitical. So for example, the only reason why the Russians and the Americans got into the space race in the first place was to keep supremacy in the high sky. There was no scientific driver for the space program. And as soon as the US found out that the USSR couldn't put a man on the moon, they stopped the funding and the program was stopped. And after that we didn't really go much further than low Earth orbit. So my question to you first is space indeed an expensive hobby? And do you see any other reason for manned space exploration? This is a question to you.
Yes.
Such as?
I think space is an expensive hobby, excluding, let's say, hardcore science experiments done in space.
Mm-hmm.
They generate value, but they do not necessarily need to be done by astronauts.
So you're saying...
So it's a bit of a grey area, really.
It's a bit of a grey area, but that would include just experiments on like the ISS, or would it also include like
Everything.
Exploration, so putting a man on Mars, sending them to other parts of the solar system or even further?
Well, then it comes to the question, why would you want to do that in the first place? Put a man on Mars.
Well, you had, well, there are some...
Human nature to explore. That's what we do.
Yes.
We like to find out more. We do it because we can.
And space is awesome, so you know.
Yeah, but try selling that to the taxpayer. And in this economy especially, we have banks falling over, that kind of problems that we all hear about in the news, of course. And if you then try to sell the idea of putting a man on Mars, it's just the enthusiasts that are hardcore and want to go there. And others just say, well...
If you put it in that context, I heard a very good one from Mr. Astronaut just now.
Yes?
If in times of crisis you invest in anything that is even touching education and the general knowledge, the economy gets a boost and you can recover. If you don't, if you start saving and cutting down, everything will go bust.
Any other views on this?
Another thing to remember is that when you talk about spending money in space, you're not spending money in space. All of the money is spent on Earth.
Yes.
So you're still investing in things. And if you look at the amount of money that comes back for every pound, euro, dollar invested in space, you'll actually find that the return on it is pretty high. In the same way that we had a protest against cuts against science funding in the UK, and we were telling them, look, for every pound you invest in science, you're going to get £10 back into the economy. And okay, they might not come tomorrow, but they will come. And if you don't invest in educating your new generation, getting those technical people, then your nation isn't going to have them, and you're going to fall behind. So it's actually
Yeah, I agree with your point, and I think it's a great point. But I'm wondering whether this still holds if you really talk about human exploration. Because human exploration is nothing that where you have directly about financial benefit from. I mean, space is extremely useful, and also it has a huge return, definitely. But for exploration, and I'm a big proponent of human exploration, don't get me wrong, but I think it's not the right way to sell this, because I think it's not true that we have a huge financial return, for instance, from human exploration.
From exploration, maybe slightly different, but then
That's exactly the point.
The problem you have then is the things that you can't quite quantify. I mean, how many people were inspired to follow STEM careers or subjects when they see people walking on the moon?
Right.
Who can name the first lunar rover or the first Mars rover? Right? How many people can name the first person that stepped on the moon? Everyone can name that.
But the main reason in the economic point you made is for a space program in general. You don't need a manned space program or a manned space exploration to get the same benefits.
Salvation of humankind.
That brings to the next point. Since this is this is actually the only convincing point I've found in literature so far.
I'm not religious, but salvation of humankind relies on getting to another planet.
Yes. What they say is, as Carl Sagan already in his book *A Pale Blue Dot* made very clear, it's not smart to keep all your eggs in the same basket. But that's not a point you can sell at this point. So,
the earlier we start with the research to be able to do that, the better we have use.
In the near future can be some natural disaster or nuclear or whatever.
You wanted to add something?
Yeah, you mentioned Carl Sagan, but it's way before Carl Sagan. And
it was already said probably.
It's Tsiolkovsky who said, it's the Earth's our cradle, but it can't stay in our cradle forever. I think we should get that quote to the Russian and not to Sagan in this, unfortunately.
Okay, but I just found it in Sagan's book, that's why I quote him.
Yeah, sure. But it's, I mean, the other thing is about revenue. What kind of expectation do you have from your revenue? Is it all stock market where you want to have the next million the next day, or achieve within 10 minutes or milliseconds, what they're doing nowadays? I mean, Columbus went to see India. He didn't find it. He found something else.
Yes.
This is a big market today. Both the United States and Canada and the rest of the countries. So, I mean, what's the argument against to say there's nothing to do?
The risk was similar.
The risk was, in their belief, even higher because they thought they would just fall off the whole thing. I mean, we are not so afraid of black holes at the moment and we get sucked into it.
The cosmic radiation.
That's something else, but not like.
But of course, at this point, we have a really short-term vision for everything. At least that's what you see in politics. You see it in economic affairs. We only plan at most a week ahead, but not 10 years or 100 years or 50 years or whatever ahead. So,
there is another project. Recently was symposium about that. 100 years.
yes,
spaceship.
it's massively underfunded. So, to get
Better than
benefits
nothing.
from that program, it's not going to happen. I think that could be actually qualified as a hobby project. There have been set goals, but the budget is so small compared to all the other things that they do that you can't really expect real results from what they're doing.
And what I read there is more focused about the social aspect than engineering solutions.
Yes.
If
So.
you want more money, then how do you get money? If you want money from the government, there have to be people thinking that that's a good idea. Well, how are you going to get people thinking that's a good idea? Well, they've got to be interested in it. How are you going to get people interested in it? Well, if there are humans up there, people that they can identify with, there are stories that they can get excited about, then they're more likely to take an interest in the program, which means they're more likely to demand that from their politicians, which means that politicians are more likely to make decisions about sending people into space. And so that will end up helping your whole space program because you need people to get people interested.
Or you can get them scared. They're
Well,
dying there.
What NASA is doing now with Curiosity is, of course, rather smart. What they do is they have this enormous media event around NSL, They have a PlayStation game, they have a lot of video streams, you can follow it, it tweets. They have teams tweeting the name of MSL. I mean, they have this enormous media thing just to get NASA back into the news and to make space exciting again.
Voyager's tweeting since 40 years.
But, that started when the Mars exploration rovers were tweeting, but they were tweeting like people.
Yeah.
Why? If a robot's so great, just tweet like statistics or things. No, it's not enough. You need to make it come alive, and that's where people come in.
Okay. But does that mean that you really, at this point, would need a manned program? Since the reason how space is sold as now is as the science thing. We want to do science, and that's why we do space exploration at this point.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well,
Is it how it's sold? Actually, like, if you were the
as soon as you go further than the ISS,
The ISS was all about international cooperation, and those are the biggest gains that come out are international cooperation, not science. So what are we really, when they sell things like that to other governments, like you want to come in, is it because you want to do science? No, it's because if we don't and they are, it comes back to politics again.
so it's all politics and
ISS is pure politics.
ISS pure politics. Okay, I agree.
Nothing else. The rest is side effect. Science is like perhaps less than 1%, and everything else is even less. If we are honest. Only thing is that most people don't know.
Around the world.
But
Countries or technology.
if you ask a random citizen, what do we do in the ISS? They don't say, well, we do their international cooperation. We don't go there for international reasons. They wouldn't say that, do they?
No, that's what we sell, but it's not what it's about. There's international corporations. One very, very important point. There's some voices who say that after the Cold War ended, there was a big decline. There was no finance in Russia, but they had all these amount of engineers. So where do those engineers go when they don't get a job because the government's not paying them anything? Where would you go if somebody, like if you don't have a job and somebody else offers you money? You go there. All these little small states which have too much money, but some evil ideas, and they want to have intercontinental ballistic missiles, send nuclear weapons somewhere. One of the big motivations for the Americans to go on with ISS is to bind Russian engineers to Russia and not let them spread out to the small countries.
Okay.
Can you sell this to the people? To knowledgeable people, yes, but general public, probably not.
Ingo, I think we had talked about this with Carl on the way here. You said that Roscosmos only has 200 engineers, or at least 200 employees, and the average age was 57?
Something like that, yes.
So how long will this still be a problem then? How long will the US need to invest in the ISS to prevent this?
They're young engineers. They're young engineers in Russia.
But very few, very few. Because you're extremely underpaid as an engineer in Russia. That's why very
You're
few.
underpaid. This means you go somewhere else even worse. If you
Yeah,
go,
that's true.
if you go for science and engineering studies, I mean, we are Western Europeans, but I mean, the Eastern European countries, they were good in studying and education in science. Traditionally, they're good at these studies. And they're actually very good at these studies equal sex. Both gender. So there's a big workforce waiting there, and they're there. They're ready to spread out.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting point for at least the ISS program. Oh yeah, that's about the international cooperation, and there are a lot of voices coming up now that if we want to go to Mars, it can only happen in the same setting. But on the other hand, except for the exploration reasons and the political reasons, they say that another point I want to make is they say robots can do it better at a fraction of the cost. So why should we send humans?
It will not have the same impact.
It won't have the same impact.
Yeah.
But they can either choose cut the budget, maybe send some robots do the same things, or spend a whole lot more money.
On the next lot of budget though. If it doesn't have the impact, if people aren't that interested, then it goes down to a smaller amount of some scientists. And you're like, well, why are we doing the science? Why
that's the coverage they get, and then you don't see him until he's back on the ground.
If you're a bit older, the hairy bags of football.
What?
If you're a bit older, the hairy bags of football.
Now we've seen him. He used to be a member of faculty, so we've seen him quite often, of course. At
And if they come up with very good stuff, what they eat, how they go to the toilet,
Yeah.
so that's not longer than a time, is it?
Science is moving robots, that's about the same.
Then put the money in context. Like you're reporting, always reporting to say a big number. Oh, this many millions. But hang on, let's look at how many millions did we just put in to save a bank that couldn't manage its own finances? How much did Apollo cost? Well, somebody apparently did this calculation that the cost of the entire Apollo program cost less than what Americans in the same period spent on popcorn. You're like, oh, that doesn't sound very much then. You know, suddenly this huge number,
do have a free
what does it
service.
mean? Well, it means the same as Americans spend on popcorn. Okay, suddenly it doesn't sound such a big number.
I think that it was Neil deGrasse Tyson, probably quite familiar. They did the calculation, and only 1.6% of the annual budget of the US is spent on spaceflight. Yet, it's such a big problem to get sufficient money for spaceflight at this point. Why?
Yeah, what's the primary reason there is so little investment
Yes.
in human spaceflight? What is the reason?
Don't get me wrong, I'm not opposing manned spaceflight, but reading all these arguments, I don't get why is there so little money for space in general, and why is there even few money available for manned spaceflight or manned space exploration?
How many politicians are scientists?
That's a good point. That's a good point.
In the UK, I don't think we have very many scientists or medics who call us doctors, and so when they come along, these people think that it's okay, what's called health service is fine, because they don't understand it. If you're not kind of passionate about it, if you don't have somebody who is passionate about it, talking about it in a room where people are voting on where the money goes, well, is it any wonder that it suddenly goes to something else? Because somebody there may get bags are really important.
So what you're saying is we should all become politicians.
Little
Well,
help.
let's be rational first. You don't become politicians.
No, but I agree with your point. It's definitely a big problem, but then you also have to ask why are there not more engineers and scientists in the government? That is probably also a problem from the point of view from the engineers and scientists who